Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Cole, and all the members of the committee. As the chairman said, it gives us no pleasure to be here again and to be here dealing with the recommended referral of criminal contempt of a former colleague of ours. We understand it's a serious matter, and it's a step we wouldn't be taking if it weren't necessary. We don't take it lightly, and we hoped we would not have to be here at all. As the chairman noted, we'd engaged in weeks and weeks of discussions with Mr. Meadows' counsel. We'd worked very diligently to try to reach agreement on cooperation. We'd scheduled a deposition at a time and a day of Mr. Meadows' choosing. But shortly before the deposition was to occur, Mr. Meadows walked away from his commitment to appear, and he informed us he would no longer cooperate. As the chairman noted, we think Mr. Meadows is improperly asserting executive and other privileges. But this contempt proceeding relates principally to Mr. Meadows' refusal to testify about the text messages and other communications he admits are not privileged. He has not claimed, and he doesn't have any privilege basis to refuse to answer our questions about these texts and about these topics. I'm just going to talk about 3 areas that are critically important to our investigation, about which Mr. Meadows has turned over materials that are non-privileged and about which he's compelled to answer our questions. As the violence was underway on the 6th, it was evident to all. But we know that for 187 minutes, President Trump refused to act. And he refused to act when his action was required, it was essential, and it was compelled by his duty, compelled by his oath of office. Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages that he has produced without any privilege claim urging President Trump to take action. I read a number of those last night to the nation. Here are a few others from Republican members. Quote, "It is really bad up here on the Hill." Another one, "The president needs to stop this ASAP." Another one, "Fix this now." And as we saw last night, dozens of texts, including from Trump administration officials, from members of the press, from Donald Trump Jr., urged immediate action by the president. But we know hours passed with no action by the president to defend the Congress of the United States from an assault while we were trying to count electoral votes, which was an official proceeding. This brings up another point. Mr. Meadows' testimony will bear on a key question in front of this committee. Did Donald Trump, through action or inaction, corruptly seek to obstruct or impede Congress's official proceeding to count electoral votes? Mr. Meadows' testimony will inform our legislative judgments on those issues. But Mr. Meadows has refused to give any testimony at all, even regarding non-privileged topics. That puts him in contempt of Congress. And let me pause and just note that we as Republicans used to be unified on this point in terms of what happened on January 6th and the responsibility the president had to stop it. We all remember, every one of us, what Republican leader McCarthy said on the floor of the House the following week. Quote, "The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump." That was Republican leader McCarthy. Mr. Meadows has also got knowledge regarding President Trump's efforts to persuade state officials to alter their official election results. In Georgia, Mr. Meadows participated in a phone call between President Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger. He was on the phone when President Trump asked the Secretary of State to, quote, "find 11,780 votes to change the result of the election in Georgia." At the time of the call, Mr. Meadows, according to texts he has turned over, appears to have been texting at least one other participant on the call. Again, Mr. Meadows has no conceivable privilege basis to refuse to testify on that topic, and doing so puts him in contempt of Congress. Finally, in the weeks before January 6th, we know that President Trump's appointees at the Justice Department told him repeatedly that his claims of election fraud were not supported by the evidence. They told him the election was not, in fact, stolen. President Trump intended to appoint Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General, in part so that Mr. Clark could alter the Department of Justice's conclusions regarding the election. Mr. Clark has now informed the committee that he anticipates potential criminal prosecution related to these matters, and he intends in upcoming testimony to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. As Mr. Meadows' non-privileged texts reveal, he was communicating multiple times with a member of Congress, a currently serving colleague of ours, who was working with Mr. Clark. Mr. Meadows has no basis to refuse to testify regarding those communications. He is in contempt. January 6th was without precedent. There has been no stronger case in our nation's history for a congressional investigation into the actions of a former president. We must investigate the facts in detail, and we are entitled to ask Mr. Meadows about the non-privileged materials he has produced to us. Any argument that the courts need to resolve privilege issues first is a pretext. We need to question him about emails and texts he has given us without any privilege claim. His role in the Raffensperger call cannot be privileged, nor can his dealings with a member of this body regarding Jeff Clark. We must get to the objective truth and ensure that January 6th never happens again. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I yield back.